The dragon mother bowed. A human child had already won her hatchlings' hearts. Tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. Readers from all over the world find these stories, and we love knowing where courage lives. The war had been over for 11 years, but nobody told the dragons. They still patrolled the Ashline Mountains the way soldiers patrol a border. Low, slow, and ready. The Kelvari Accord of 2041 had ended the 3-year aerial conflict between the Continental Human Alliance and the dragon clans of the Northern Ridge, but peace on paper meant nothing when a shadow the size of a cargo plane could pass over your village without warning and leave every child screaming beneath their beds. Marin Doyle had stopped screaming at shadows when he was 4. He was 9 now, and he lived at the edge of everything. Fort Caldwell was not a real fort anymore. It had been a military outpost during the war, then a refugee station, then a resettlement camp, and now it was simply a town, 340 people clinging to the base of the Ashline Range because the soil was good and the altitude kept the southern fever away. The dragons ignored them, mostly. As long as the humans stayed below the Fire Ridge marker, a line of scorched stone that ran for 6 kilometers along the mountain face, there was no trouble. Marin crossed that line every week. Not out of defiance. Not out of stupidity. Out of habit and something that felt even to him like gravity. It had started 2 years ago with curiosity and a handful of carnival glitter his mother had saved from a supply convoy. He had scattered it near a cluster of rocks above the marker on a dare from himself, watching it catch the morning light. He had come back the next day to see if it was still there. It was not. But something else was. 3 sets of small clawed prints circled the spot where the glitter had been. The prints were no bigger than his palm, too small to belong to any adult dragon he had ever seen in the war footage his father kept on the old drive. These were something younger. Something that had been curious enough to come close, and smart enough not to leave a trail leading back. Marin had smiled for the first time in months. He told no one. He came back with more glitter. His father, Sergeant Cole Doyle, retired, spent most days at the communications post translating old Kelvari signal patterns for the Alliance's fragile diplomatic office. His mother, Dina, ran the medical station. They were good people ground thin by years of fear. Marin loved them precisely because he understood their exhaustion, and he protected them from his secret the way a good son protects a wound, carefully and with clean hands. The tracks kept appearing. Each week, a new shape left near the glitter. Arranged, not scattered. A flat stone placed upright. A piece of quartz balanced on another piece. Communication or something trying to become it. Marin began leaving things in return. Small constructions. A tower of pebbles. A circle of pine cones. A spiral drawn in ash. He did not know what he was building. He knew it mattered. On the morning that changed everything, he climbed higher than he ever had before, following a pattern of quartz pieces that had been laid out like a trail. The mountain air was thin and cold and smelled like sulfur and pine. His boots were wrong for the terrain and his jacket was a size too large, passed down from a boy who had grown and left. He climbed anyway. He found them in a hollow beneath a cracked granite shelf. 5 hatchlings, none larger than a medium dog, their scales still soft and iridescent in the early light. They were huddled together in the specific way young animals huddle, not for warmth but for courage. They had been waiting. One of them had a piece of green carnival glitter pressed between 2 small claws. Marin sat down on the cold rock, said nothing and opened his jacket pocket. He pulled out the last of his supply, a small glass vial of mixed glitter his mother had given him before the war ended, told him to save for something worth celebrating. He opened it and poured it slowly onto the stone between them. The hatchlings did not run. They leaned forward. And somewhere above, hidden in the shadows of the ridge, something enormous and ancient went very, very still. Her name, in the Kelvari tongue, translated roughly as she who holds the sky accountable. The Alliance diplomatic files listed her as Subject Varda, matriarch class, estimated age 340 years, wingspan 41 meters, confirmed kill count during the war, none. That last detail was the one that confused every analyst who read it. Varda had fought in 17 engagements. She had been present at the burning of Crossfield Station, the siege of the Amber Pass, the aerial assault on Relay Tower 9. In every case her clan had caused catastrophic structural damage. In every case human casualties had been 0. The analysts called it luck. The diplomatic team called it coincidence. Cole Doyle, who had survived Relay Tower 9 by hiding under a collapsed wall while a dragon the size of a building dismantled the structure above him with surgical precision, called it something he could not prove and therefore never reported. Varda had pulled that wall toward him. Not away. She had made him a shelter. He had never told anyone, including his son. Varda watched the boy now from the high ridge, her body pressed flat against the granite in a posture her clan called the listener's stone, full stillness, all senses forward. She had watched him for 2 years. She had watched her 5 youngest, the last clutch she would ever carry, born 3 weeks after the accord was signed, respond to him in ways that bypassed every instinct she had trained into them. Stay above the marker. Trust nothing that walks on 2 legs. Survive. They had broken every rule and they had done it for glitter. She should have moved them. She had chosen not to, and she was still calculating why. The boy was small even for a human child. He climbed badly, too much weight on his front foot, wrong hand placement on the rock faces, but he never stopped. He had fallen twice that she had seen and risen both times without sound, which was the thing that had first made her pause. Human young made noise when they fell. It was one of the ways she had learned to track them during the war, before she had decided tracking led to choices she did not want to make. This one was quiet. He sat now with her hatchlings and did not reach for them. He placed the glitter and waited. The hatchlings read this correctly, she could see it in their posture, the way Sev, the boldest, leaned in first, followed by Kala and the twins. Even Rue, the smallest, who had been born with a weak left wing and startled at shadows, moved toward the boy with something other than fear. Varda processed this slowly. She had 340 years of pattern recognition. She had watched humans during the war with the focus of someone trying to understand a species before committing to a decision about them. What she had found had made the decision harder, not easier. Humans were contradictory in ways that defied modeling. They were capable of extraordinary violence and extraordinary gentleness, sometimes within the same hour, sometimes within the same individual. The boy was speaking now, softly. She could hear it but not parse the words at this distance. What she could read was tone, and what she read in his tone was not performance. He was not trying to seem safe. He simply was, in this moment, safe, which was a different thing entirely and far more rare. Sev climbed onto the boy's knee. Varda's breath stopped. Sev was her most instinct-sharp hatchling, the one most likely to survive if something happened to Varda before they were old enough to be independent. Sev did not make errors of trust. Sev had bitten a supply drone at 4 weeks old and had been correct to do so. Sev was sitting on a human child's knee and making the low sound Kalvari called the first word, the vocalization hatchlings made when they accepted something as part of their world. Varda lay still for a long time. Then, because she was 340 years old and had survived by knowing when a pattern had already decided itself, she began to revise every plan she had made for the next decade. Below her, Marin Doyle laughed, a small, real sound, and 3 more hatchlings climbed onto him at once. The mountain held its breath. Varda let hers go. She did not descend. She was not ready. But she shifted her position slightly, deliberately, so that her shadow fell across the hollow where her children sat with the boy, not as a threat but as a roof. She gave them shade. It was the closest thing she had to a welcome. The survey drone came on a Tuesday, which Marin would later think was exactly the kind of detail that made disasters feel real. Not dramatic days, not storm-heavy mornings, just a Tuesday with flat clouds and cold wind and a drone the size of a kitchen table humming over the fire ridge marker like it owned the mountain. He heard it before he saw it. He was halfway up the trail, a canvas bag over one shoulder holding the things he had started bringing for the hatchlings. Not glitter anymore, they had moved past glitter, but small puzzles he built from wood scraps and wire. Lock mechanisms. Sliding panels. Things that required thought to open with a piece of dried meat sealed inside. Sev had mastered the first design in 4 minutes. Marin had been so stunned he had sat motionless for a full minute before remembering to breathe. He heard the drone and stopped. It was Alliance issue. He knew the sound from the resettlement days when they had buzzed Fort Caldwell twice a day for security sweeps. This one was higher end. Newer. The kind the Diplomatic Intelligence Division used for terrain mapping and, less officially, for target identification. Marin looked up the trail. The hollow was 12 minutes ahead. If the hatchlings were out, which they usually were by this hour, the drone would see them. If it saw them, it would transmit. If it transmitted, someone in an office somewhere would make a decision, and decisions made in offices about things on this mountain had a history of going wrong. He did not think. He moved. He cut left off the trail, scrambling up a secondary rock face he had found 2 months ago, steeper, faster, brutal on the hands. He reached the ridge above the hollow in 9 minutes, which was a personal record he did not register. He came over the top and dropped into the hollow, landing hard and rolling, and 5 hatchlings scattered in 5 directions before recognizing him and freezing. "Come here," he said. "All of you. Now." They read his urgency. Sev was on him in seconds. and Marin had learned enough Kelvari body language to point firmly at the shadow beneath the deepest rock shelf. He herded them there with his body, pressing them back into the darkness, and then he did something he had never done before. He sat in front of them, facing outward, and spread his jacket wide. He made himself a wall. The drone passed over the hollow 40 seconds later. It slowed above them, he could hear the pitch change, the sensor sweep, and then it moved on. He sat still for 10 full minutes after the sound faded. When he finally lowered his arms, Rue climbed into his lap and pressed against him, shaking. Marin put his hand on Rue's back, feeling the small heartbeat, and looked up at the sky. That was when he saw Varda. She was on the ridge directly above him, not hidden, not pressed flat. She was sitting upright, her full silhouette against the gray sky, watching him. He had seen photographs of Kelvari matriarchs in his father's war files. He knew what they looked like. Nothing in the photographs had prepared him for the reality of something that large, being that still. She looked at him for a long time. He looked back. He did not run. He did not look away. He shifted slightly so Rue was more covered by his jacket, a small and instinctive adjustment, and he kept his eyes on hers. Varda lowered her head. Not a threat display. Not an attack posture. He had read enough of his father's files to know the difference. This was something else, a slow, deliberate drop of the head, chin nearly to the stone. He did not know the word for it. He would learn later, from a Kelvari linguistic file his father had buried in the archives, that it was called Dareth, a gesture made only between equals, only when something true had been witnessed. She had seen him cover her children with his body. He had not done it to impress her. He had not done it because he was brave. He had done it because they were small and the drone was coming and there was no one else. That, Varda had understood, was the entire point. She held the Dareth for 3 full seconds. Then she rose and stepped back from the ridge's edge, out of sight, but she left one massive claw print visible in the soft stone at the rim. A mark. Not a warning. A signature. Marin looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at the 5 hatchlings watching him from the shadows and said very quietly, "I think we need to tell my dad." Cole Doyle had survived a war, a peace, a resettlement, and 11 years of translating communications that assumed the worst about everything. He was not a man who panicked. But when his 9-year-old son sat down across from him at the kitchen table and said, "I need to show you something, and I need you to promise not to report it until you hear everything," Cole felt the specific cold that parents feel when they understand a threshold has already been crossed. He listened. It took Marin 40 minutes to explain 2 years. Cole did not interrupt. He was trained not to interrupt during intelligence briefings, and some part of him understood that this was exactly what this was, the most important intelligence he had ever received, delivered by someone with no training and perfect accuracy. When Marin finished, Cole was quiet for a long time. "The drone was Alliance DI, he said finally. "I can pull the flight log. If it recorded anything, there will be an analysis request within 72 hours, and if anyone identifies Kelvari hatchlings above the marker, they'll send a team," Marin said. "Yes. And Varda will see the team coming." "Yes. And then it won't be 11 years of quiet anymore." Cole looked at his son, at the calm in his face, the specific stillness of someone who had already calculated consequences and arrived at a position, and felt the ground shift beneath everything he thought he knew about what was possible. "What are you asking me to do?" he said. "I'm asking you to help me arrange a meeting," Marin said. "A real one. Between someone from the diplomatic office and Varda. Before the DI team gets here. Something that goes on record as official first contact, so there's a file, so there's a framework, so no one can just send a strike team and call it a threat response." Cole stared at him. "You're 9. The hatchlings are 4 months old," Marin said. "Varda won't survive watching someone take them. And if she retaliates, the accord collapses and you know what happens after that." He paused. "I watched you translate Kelvari signals for 3 years. I know you know how to initiate a contact request." Cole was silent for a very long time. Then he stood up, went to his communications post and began to type. It took him 18 hours to reach someone in the diplomatic office who was not also connected to the intelligence division. Her name was Director Harlow Vess, and she had spent 6 years negotiating the Accord's fine print and considered it the most important document of her career. When Cole explained what his son had built, she was silent for 11 seconds. He counted, and then she said, "I need to be there in person. Can your son get a message to the matriarch?" Cole looked at Marin, who had been standing in the doorway listening. Marin nodded. He went up the mountain that afternoon with a flat piece of shale and a stick of chalk, the closest thing to a neutral communication surface he had. He drew a simple diagram, 2 figures meeting at a midpoint, a sun in the corner to indicate morning, a number of lines to indicate the day after tomorrow. He left it at the claw print. In the morning, the shale had been moved 6 inches forward, toward the mountain, not away, and a single scale, iridescent blue-green had been placed on top of it. Marin carried it down like it was made of glass. Director Vess arrived the following dawn, alone as promised, in civilian clothes, carrying nothing that could be read as a weapon. Cole stood beside her. Marin stood in front of both of them because it had been understood, without anyone saying it, that he was the one who had built this bridge and he was the one who should stand on it first. They waited at the fire ridge marker as the morning light crossed the mountain. Varda came down. She had never come below the ridge before. She moved with the deliberate slowness of something choosing vulnerability, which is the most powerful thing any creature can choose, and she stopped 20 meters from them and looked at each of them in turn. When her eyes reached Marin, she held. He did not flinch. He raised his right hand, palm forward, the gesture he had developed in the hollow because it was the only human gesture he could think of that meant I have nothing hidden. Varda lowered her head in Dareth. Director Vess exhaled slowly beside him. Cole put a hand on his son's shoulder briefly and then removed it, because Marin was standing perfectly straight and did not need steadying. Tell her, Marin said to the director, that we're not here to negotiate. We're here because something already exists and we want to make sure it's protected. Vess looked at him. You understand I'm the diplomat. Yes, Marin said. But she's here because of me. Vess was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. She turned to Varda and began to speak. The agreement took 9 days to formalize. It was not called a treaty. Director Vess had been insistent on that point. Treaties implied prior conflict and established adversarial parties. What they drafted instead was a compact of mutual recognition, a document that acknowledged what already existed between the Kelvari clan of the Northern Ridge and the human settlement at Fort Caldwell, and committed both sides to its continuation and protection. The Fire Ridge marker was redesignated. Not removed, Varda had been clear, through a combination of Kelvari gesture and the linguistic files Cole had spent a night cross-referencing, that a boundary served a purpose. But the new designation included a passage protocol, documented and filed with both Alliance Command and the Kelvari Council of Matriarchs, the existence of which had surprised everyone at the diplomatic office except Cole, who had suspected organized governance for years. The DI drone's flight log was reviewed. It had captured thermal signatures in the hollow but no visual confirmation. The rock shelf had been sufficient cover. The analysis request had been filed, reviewed, and quietly reclassified by Director Vess on the grounds that an active diplomatic contact superseded a surveillance protocol. 2 people in the intelligence division were unhappy about this. They were noted and managed. Marin went back to school. This was, in his opinion, the least satisfying part of the outcome, but his mother had been firm, and he understood her reasoning. The world had shifted in 9 days. It needed time to settle before the next shift. He understood the value of waiting. He still went up the mountain. The protocol allowed it, specifically by name at his insistence, a clause he had asked Director Vess to include and which she had argued for with a precision that suggested she agreed more than she let on. The clause read, Marin Cole Doyle, age 9, Fort Caldwell resident, retains unrestricted access above the Fire Ridge marker under compact terms, contingent on voluntary compliance with safety check-ins. He checked in. Every time. The hatchlings grew. Sev's puzzle designs now took Marin 20 minutes to build and 40 seconds for Sev to dismantle. Marin had begun leaving the wire and scraps and letting Sev build instead, and what Sev constructed bore no resemblance to anything in any engineering manual but worked, consistently, in ways that a university professor who had been quietly added to the diplomatic observation team called non-trivially interesting. Rue's left wing strengthened. Marin had noticed, for months in, that Rue extended it more readily when the sun hit it directly and had begun adjusting his visits to give Rue the best angle. He had not told anyone. It was not his information to share. Varda did not come down from the ridge again. She did not need to. What she had come down for was done, and the mountain was hers, and she knew the difference between descent as statement and descent as surrender. But on the mornings Marin climbed, she was always visible, not hidden, not pressed flat, not performing threat. Simply present. The way a parent is present when a child crosses a street they have learned to cross alone. Cole Doyle finished his translation contract and turned down the renewal. He accepted a position as civilian liaison for the Compact's implementation team, a role created specifically because it had become clear within the first 2 weeks that someone who had spent 3 years listening to Kelvari signals and 1 long night reading linguistic files had developed an ear for things the formal diplomatic team was still learning to hear. He was good at it. He was, his supervisor noted in her first review, exceptional at knowing when silence meant agreement and when it meant something was wrong. Cole knew where he had learned that. On the last day of the 9th month, Marin climbed to the hollow and found something he had not left there. A flat piece of stone, smooth and dark, with markings pressed into it in a pattern he did not immediately recognize. He sat with it for a long time, turning it in his hands, and then he understood. It was a map. The marks were Kelvari directional notation, cross-referenced with landmarks he had learned to identify from the ridge. The map showed a location higher up the mountain than he had ever been. A route he had not known existed, drawn with the precision of something that had been watching his climbing habits for 2 years and knew exactly which path would suit his skill level. At the center of the destination point was a single mark he recognized from the linguistic files. Dareth. The word for what is witnessed between equals. He looked up at the ridge. Varda was there, still watching. He held up the stone so she could see he had it. She did not move. She did not need to. He had learned to read stillness. He put the map carefully in his jacket pocket, next to the glass vial he still carried. Empty now, every last piece of glitter long since given away to 5 small creatures who had chosen him before he had known he was choosing them. He started climbing. The mountain was cold and the path was steep and there was no one with him. He went anyway. That was, in the end, the only thing that had ever needed to be true. Thank you for reading. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes courage comes in unexpected sizes. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from?